Welcome to Prajnya Gender Talks series. We're very happy to welcome Anuradha Kapoor today. This is Anu's second visit to Prajnya, and I'm hoping that we will do this much more often because there was a 6-year gap between the last one and this one. And today, to have her here in 2020 is very special because Swayam is celebrating its 25th, or just has celebrated its 25th birthday. And we're very excited for them and very proud of their work over the last quarter century. So I'm going to start by reading out Anu's bio. And Anu, we do this now because women keep running away from their bios and then no one gets to know all the things that they've done. Anuradha Kapoor is one of India's most celebrated women's rights activists. She's the founder and director of Swayam, a non-profit organization working for the rights of an end of violence against women. Over the past 2 decades or so, Anuradha has been at the forefront of a nationwide movement against all forms of violence against women. Before becoming a social activist, she was working as a manager of Seagull Books, a publishing house in Kolkata. A Lady Shri Ram College alumna, Anuradha volunteered at shelter homes for women in Kolkata in the early 90s, helping women develop livelihood skills and raising funds for them. Her interaction with the women gave her a deeper understanding of women's lived realities, particularly in the context of the violence they faced. Swayam, her organization, works with families, students, police, lawyers, and policymakers in addition to women. And as I said, they're 25 now. So welcome, Anu, and we're very excited to listen to you.
Thank you so much, Swarna, and thank you to Prajnya for inviting me. It's interesting because this is an opportunity to talk about, you said 25-year journey, which I don't think I've ever done. So I can, it's like a documentation for us. Thank you for creating this space. And I just thought
I'm going to interrupt you here because I forgot to say something. One reason this is so important to us is also that we have a women's history program. The original avatar of this series, which is now very properly called, politically correctly called Prajnya Gender Talks, was Women's History Roundtable series. Okay. So to document work like yours is very central to our self-definition and mandate. So,
right. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the work that we do, but I thought that I'm not going to talk too much. At least that's what I'm saying. I don't know how long it'll take to say what I want to say, but I'm going to try and keep that. And then we can have questions and answers and we can go with that. So let me start at the beginning. In 1995 is when I started Swayam. And at that time, to be honest, I had no idea what I was getting into because my background was not from the field. I wasn't from the development sector. As Swarna said, I was working with a organization that was a publishing and also, it was a foundation for the arts. So I had a background of 10 years of working in that organization. But I was looking, actually at that time, I was doing some volunteer work. And through that, I got interested in, I was always interested in women. But, through working with these organizations, I realized that there was a real need to start an organization that supported women who were facing violence. Because at that time, I was looking for organizations working on violence, but I couldn't find them. They were there, but they were not visible. And, there were smaller organizations, some were providing one service, others another service. So a woman had to go pillar to post and was not getting all the services that she required. And I joined one of those organizations as a volunteer. And that was also a voluntary organization. Once a week, we met for a couple of hours and that's it. And that's when I got really an understanding of what women were going through because survivors used to come and they would talk about their problems. And I was like, I was shocked by what I heard. I could not believe women had to face what they did, what they were talking about in their lives because I didn't have that experience. And so I decided after working for a while that this is a need and I started Swayam. And the whole idea about Swayam was, Swayam means oneself. Swayam means I can do things and change my life. That was our belief that, if a woman uh, wants to change her situation, she has the capacity to do it, but she needs support. Otherwise, it's very hard for her to make that change. But if she's determined and she has that support, she can actually change her life. And I've seen that over the last 25 years. I've seen women do that all the time. And so that's why we called it Swayam, that you can change your life yourself. And the idea was really looking at violence against women in a holistic way. And so we started with two programs, like ongoing ones. They weren't projects, they were what we call ongoing work. One was preventive and one was curative. So it was like the curative part was women survivors who came to us to provide them support services so that they could change their situation. And on the other hand, was how do we create an environment where violence against women does not take place? Because can't have a band-aid approach. Something's happened and you're putting a band-aid on it. You also have to prevent that hurt from happening in the first place. So from the very beginning, we had two sides to our work. And I think that one of the more unique parts of our work is that because we work with women on the ground, we have a very deep understanding of what they actually go through, whether it is within the family or whether it is within the larger community, whether it is with their interface with the state, with the laws. All of this is like we can see it on a day-to-day basis, and our knowledge gets updated because situations change, laws change, things change, but we are updated on that so that this knowledge can be used towards advocacy work, so that we can actually take it to the next level. And sort of when we speak about change or laws, or we are speaking from a position of knowledge from the ground, we're not speaking from a theoretical perspective. So I think that that has been a very solid kind of foundation for the organization, working with survivors, and then also creating that space. So when we started in 1995, it was a Beijing conference, if you remember that year. It was all very heady, and women's groups were being, for the first time, I mean, actually coming together, were being brought together very on a sustained manner by the state agencies. And so I started meeting a whole bunch of other organizations and getting, and we formed in Bengal, we formed a network called Moitri in 1995, which was women's groups coming together for the first time as a network. And the first network meeting actually happened at Swayam. So that was like, in those days, that was the discovery of each other's work. And the other thing that I realized when I wanted to start this organization, there was no literature available. How do you do this? How, everybody I spoke to, all the activists in those days said, just get into it and you will learn. So even if I wanted a book on what were the laws relating to women, I didn't find it. So I had to download, I had to, find material, put it together. And I realized that even as I was looking for organizations around who was doing what, I didn't know because people couldn't tell me. So one of the first things that we did as Swayam was to take out the first resource directory of organizations working on women's issues I think it's in the country. Because after that, we did this, there was another organization that was starting at the same time as a documentation center. So we collaborated on that book called Shongita. And after that, UN Women took it up as a program. And then another 7, 8 books came out across the different states. And slowly, more and more organizations and stuff started doing this whole putting together of listings in books of which organizations are doing what, so that I actually was very clear I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I did not want to do anything that was already being done. I wanted us to do things that were the gaps in the system. And so there was a lot of like vocational training happening in the city for women. So I didn't want to start vocational training, but I wanted to know where I could send women. And plus they would also get a lot more options if you were able to give them, that facility. So we did that. So these were some of the basic things that we started doing. But when the organization started, what we did was we started providing mental health services, which is counseling, therapy, legal aid, working with the police, if the women wanted to file cases, then going with them, getting the cases filed, following up those cases in the police station, following up the cases in court. Because, what was very clear was at that time, even we didn't know so much. So forget women who are coming to you with their problems. They didn't know what the law was, how the courts operated, how the system operated. So we were constantly with them in that process so that we could explain to them what was going on, what to expect or not to expect. Because most of the time, lawyers were not telling them, what actually they went into court without knowing what was happening in court. And we were very clear that whoever goes to court from Swayam will know exactly what's happening in her case. So that, the support that you give is that they need to know how their cases are functioning. The lawyers that we saw used to treat women like fools, like they don't understand. They won't understand their own case, which is ridiculous. They never gave the briefs to women. Their own case briefs were never with them. When they came and we'd ask them what has happened in the case, they could never tell you if they had already filed a case, which most of them didn't. But those of them who had didn't even have their paperwork with them. So that was the idea, to help them with the police, and then there was also, trying to help them with vocational training. And then if they needed shelter, then to refer them to the shelter homes, do the linking with that, helping them with jobs, referrals for jobs. So it was like a holistic thing on the one hand of individual services. But what we were also very um, focused on was the fact that when women come to you as survivors of any form of violence, they are in a situation where they feel very isolated, they're very alone. They've normally been cut off from family, friends, and also, who they believe that the fault is with them, because they're constantly told whatever's happening to you is because of your behavior. And and that it's happening only with them. Nobody else faces this because there's so much of silence around violence, right? So that silence needed to be broken. And when they came to Swayam, and we formed groups, support groups of these women, they realized that this is not only happening to me, it's happening to many women, and the silence is there for all of them. And so the problem lies with the system, it lies with patriarchy, it lies with something beyond us. It's not an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. And that there are many women facing it, and that women are at different points in their lives, right? So when they see somebody who's been able to overcome her issues, they feel I can also do it. So there was a lot of solidarity through those support groups. The whole idea was to bring women together to say, it's not your fault, support each other and see that change is possible and you can do it. And I think that group activity that started out as a support group slowly over time grew. And we have about, I think, 15 different group activities right now. And it has grown over the years through the demands of women about, what they need. I mean, now, for example, and as I said, mental health was really integrated into our work from the very beginning, because we were clear that violence against women affects women's mental health in a very negative way. And every woman who came to us had some symptom of either depression or, trauma, all of these things, because this is an internalized, ingrained violence over and over again that was happening. Or if it was sexual abuse, then it had a very strong, traumatic experience, would create a lot of mental health issues. So we had mental health integrated right at the very beginning. And so as women came in, where they had counseling for what they could do in terms of options, but they also had therapy for healing themselves. And the group activities were also a lot of them to do with mental health. And they, for example, asked for anger management. How do we manage our anger? We're so angry, we don't know how to, and then that anger is coming out on the children, because the power plays itself out as it is. So we integrated all of the needs that they had, and then understanding that mental health and mental illness, you cannot, you do not need to stigmatize it, and that you need to, understand that it is important to maintain your mental health as much as it is for your physical health. So to break that stigma about mental health also was one of the things that we were doing constantly. So we have many, many of these group activities. And we would also have, like, for example, a 5-day workshop where we take women out of the city. Most of these women have never been out for 5 days, right? And the whole workshop is focused around, at one level, understanding why violence happens, but most importantly, on themselves. So it's a reflection of self. And when you reflect yourself, then it's like uh, women would come back and say, I never thought about myself in my life. This is the first time I thought about what do I want? What do I want from my relationships? What kind of work do I want to do? What do I think of what is happening around me? So me as myself, I have never thought of. And so it was really an empowerment thing of connecting with self. So we have many such group activities, which I won't go into details about. But our whole idea was when you work with survivors, you work with them as survivors. We call them survivors. People have an issue saying they're victims, and I don't believe they're victims, because when they walk through the door, they've survived violence. So I look at them, and it's a more positive way of addressing women and telling them, like, if you tell them you're a victim, it in itself is it in itself is a disempowering word. Whereas when you tell them that you have been able to survive all of this and you can move on and become an agent of change, that takes it to a different trajectory. I know there may be problems with this formulation, but that's how we look at it. And it's worked for us because the women have a very positive way of moving ahead. So we are moving them from survivors to agents of change. That's the idea. And uh, for this agents of change now, we also use a lot of the arts in order to involve women in creating change. So we now have 4 survivor groups, actually 5. Yeah, we have a theater group of survivors that started from actually a support group. Again, it came out organically. We had a support group meeting where I had given them a little exercise to do about there's domestic violence happening next door and you can hear it. And then what would you do? Act it out. And they acted it out, right? And then they said, like, wait, this is a great way of expressing what's going on. Let's do a theater group. So we started a theater group, which now is almost like 22 years since we've had the group. We have a music group, again, women who decided to use singing as a way of communicating about the issues. So they write their own songs, all issue based. They put music to it. We have 2 cassettes that are out, CDs of their music, of their songs. And so they all are prevention campaigns. For example, the survivors are part of that campaign. They will come there, they will perform, they will do theater, they will do music. We also have a very interesting book and a magazine called Proyash, where survivors write. So that is another way of empowering them, that talk about yourself, you can write, and in whichever way you want. And so that gets published. And so we have had we do 4 issues every year, and I think we've done 75 issues so far in these years of Prayash. And we've also done some translations into English, over time. So that is another way in which they come across to, to talk about what is happening to them and what they want to say. And honestly, now Prayash has become a magazine where they don't only now talk only about violence. They're talking about every issue that concerns, all of us. So that, I think, and it's very sort of interactive in a way that we do workshops with them, and then they write and we publish. So that is another thing that we're doing. And we've also had a group of survivors who we train to do the work that we are doing with them, so that they can go back into their own communities and then take support the women in their communities. The first level of support they can give them, and then if they need to, they can refer them to us. But that, so through understanding of laws, how do you go to the police station, what do you say, how do you write a GD, FIR? So those are the kinds of training that we do with them. So we have one group which is like that. So all of these groups are actually, and recently we've started a dance group that has not taken off onto the ground yet. They're still learning. So they want to do the same awareness through dance. So that's I'm talking very much in a nutshell, the work that we're doing with women. So at an individual level, at a group level. And as far as the preventive work is concerned, like when we began, we were very clear about one thing, that if we want social change, it cannot be done on our own as an individual organization. We have to collaborate. So networking is key to our work. From the very beginning, we've collaborated with organizations locally, nationally, internationally, because we feel that, without that, you're not going to really make the impact that you want to make and create the change that you want to create. So as I said, Moitri, we were part of that initiation. And then when we, in 2005, we initiated the network called Aman Global Voices for Peace in the Home, which was working on domestic violence. It's an international network, but mostly working in India. Nationally, we have about, I think now 156 or 57 organizations part of the network. And the idea was that, all of us should share strategies about how we are working, what are our challenges, support each other, and most importantly, support survivors across the country. So if there is a woman here today and there is another woman in Chennai, and she is from Calcutta and she's facing a problem, then we can put her in touch with an organization there. And if she comes back here, then we can work with her. So how do you provide the best support to women? Similarly, overseas, we have collaborations with other organizations overseas so that we can help women. So that was the idea with Aman. We also started a network called, and this is over time. I mean, Aman started in 2005. Bhavna was, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was around 2008, 9. I'm not sure. But Bhavna also started as a network in West Bengal to address child marriage. So that is another network that we began. And then, we've been part of various networks and continue to be. Right to Food Network. We had also created a network for men and boys for gender equality, which fell through because the men and boys we didn't want to continue it. We wanted them to continue it. It fell, but we try as much as we can to, bring people together and then work with people. So networking has been a very important part. And obviously advocacy, if you do along with other people, it's definitely going to have that space. The whole idea of advocacy is to do it together. So we did that. And then we in this preventive space, the idea is to do awareness programs so that you're changing. We know the problem is because of mindset. So how do you change the mindset? So at one level, there is creating awareness of the fact this exists, what is wrong with it. And on the other hand is also this is an awareness, but then how do you change capacities of people? How do you change thinking? So through training and capacity building also with, everybody from state agencies like the police, lawyers, judges, the works, all of them, CBOs, students at the college level, school level, we're doing trainings and capacity building and awareness programs with all of them. And then we also do research and publications so that, that can be used for advocacy. And then we are also doing advocacy work, definitely. So I just want to touch on a few of the campaigns and stuff. When you were talking about the 16-day campaign, actually, we started it in 1997 or 6, I remember, I'm not sure, almost the very next year since we began. And I know that at that time, it was not something that everybody did in the country. At that time, it was like nobody really did it. And so when we introduced it, we got all the organizations in the city and nationally. We went up to about 250 organizations nationally doing the 16 days campaigning together. So for a while that happened, and then everybody took it up as their own thing. And everyone now does 16 days. But at that time, it was something very new. So the 16-day campaign started. And then, of course, awareness through the year, which culminated in this 16-day campaign, OBR, and other dailinesses of campaigns that we began. And when we're looking at prevention work, we started with a center in the city where women would come to us, not necessarily where we would go out to women. That was the model. Women will come to us, and they come from all the suburbs and everywhere. But here, what we realized when women were coming to us, they were saying, Didi, I can come to you, but where I live, other women are not even allowed out. Can you not start something in where I live? So we started a second center in Metya Bruce, which is also an urban center, but it's a community-based center that caters to women in that area. And then we realized it's not enough for us to just do this kind of supportive work for them, but also create awareness within their communities. So we started doing, bringing women in groups together, talking to them about issues, and then empowering them to take this message into their own communities and to support women in their own communities. So we've been doing that now for the last 10 years or so in Metya Bruce. And we then started another program in Diamond Harbour, which is a rural area, where we have another community center, again, providing support to women. But at the same time, we have groups of women who are again trained and then they go back into the community to do the work that we're doing. And as we were doing that, we realized, of course, that you cannot work only with women. You have to work with men and boys, because the problem lies with the men and boys, right? So it's how they are being brought up. I mean, it's not that because they are men and boys, they have a problem. The problem is how they're being brought up. So how do we address that? So we started working directly with men and boys about 5 years ago in the two communities. And so now we have groups of men and boys also who are being taught about how patriarchy gives you privileges at one hand, on the one hand, but also is there are lots of disadvantages for you. And what do you gain by equality? You may lose something, but what do you gain? And then how can you become a member of a community that will promote gender equality, and talk to other men and boys and make that change? So that has been another thing that we added on as we went along. Um, and in terms of the capacity building work, as I said, we began right, I think around 96, 97, working with an organization in Delhi called Sakshi, to do judicial training with judges at the district court levels. And this we did for about 7 or 8 years. It was a very successful program and very, very required, because we did a study on judicial attitudes towards women. And it was like, all the patriarchal thinking that you can ever think of was present amongst the judges. One of the judges actually told a colleague who was interviewing him that, look, if I come home late and my wife asks me where I've been, she'll get a slap. I mean, what else? Now, if that judge is going to sit in my case, what justice am I going to get? So the idea was to change, the thinking. So we did a lot of judicial trainings in collaboration in something called the Asia Pacific Advisory Forum on Judicial Education on Equality Issues. A very long, big name, but that's what we did. And then we have been, doing trainings now with lawyers, with students, with now a lot more of training around how do you handle cases of violence with CBOs and NGOs, because we now have the knowledge, which was not available when we started. So how do we share this knowledge so that other organizations are also able to equip their workers to be able to deal with this issue? So we now have like trainings of a 1-week training on casework and 1-week training on how do you do counseling. So those have been also introduced so that we can support other organizations. So you're becoming more of a mentor organization. At the same time, in terms of advocacy over the years, we were very much part of the movement to get the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act formulated and passed in Parliament. So we were like, from the first drafting to the revisions, to the going to committees, to going and having the national meetings and giving our inputs, sitting with groups in the city, all of that, like advocacy around it. So that took 10 years, huh? And finally, from 95 to 2005, that law was passed. And then 2006, it got implemented. So we've been very much part of the actual formulation of the law, but also more importantly, the implementation of the law, which again continues to be very problematic. So how do we make sure that implementation happens? At the same time, we've been to select committees for 498A rollback, because, there's always been this thing of misuse, and we've constantly gone and we've done a little study, which we presented to the National Commission for Women and to the select committee about how the law is not used, forget about misused. So those were the, things that we've done. And then also the Justice Verma Committee speaking before that, presenting our case as far as criminal law amendments are concerned. And then at the international level, also the CEDAW shadow report that is written. In 2014, we wrote the Violence Against Women chapter, collaborating with all other organizations across the country. And now with the whole pandemic, we also put together a report for the Special Rapporteur for Women, Violence Against Women, on domestic violence and the pandemic. So, again, experiences across the country and ours to the UN agencies, so that they could then talk about what needs to be done at the government levels. So there's been a lot of like a local, national, international kind of work. And then we also do trainings with Bangladesh. We have a 15-day gender training that we do on gender development, human rights. So there's a lot of that kind of work that we're doing. Um, yeah, I think more or less. I mean, and then in terms of the research and publications, we've done like one of the first studies that we did, as I said, was on judicial, thinking, but more how does violence affect women's mental health. We also have done a book now on judgments on PWDVA, and how do we as um, activists and lawyers, how do we use the law for the betterment of women's rights. We also did a study on domestic violence against women in Bengal, in the two communities that we were working in. So, things like this that help us to kind of move forward. And then one of the earlier ones was also on sexual harassment. How do young people see what they call eve teasing, which we call sexual harassment? So, what are their attitudes, and also attitudes of your students towards gender equality. So all of these have helped us in our advocacy work. So overall, I think this is a short kind of brief on what we do. Uh, and I'm happy to, I mean, this is kind of what we do, and a journey of where we started as an organization of two people. And now we are an organization of, I think, more than 40 of us. And we had one center, we now have three. We started with awareness programs as our prevention work, but then it moved from to the advocacy part, the capacity building. We've become more of a mentoring organization now, which we didn't start out as, because when we started, we were still learning. So the trajectory has been very sort of, I mean, what I've told you is the net result of 25 years of work. So I'm happy to take questions.
And I suspect that it's really précis
Yeah,
rather than a full account, because
it's a précis, yes.
it's,
I mean, I'm
each
just
of these
touching up.
involves so many other things.
Yeah. And since you said like 25 minutes to half an hour, I'm sort of just touching on everything. If I were to, you know, I can talk about each aspect if somebody wants to have a specific, you know, how. And I forgot to say one more thing, was that it's not just working with survivors. We also work with survivors' children and with their families. And the child program is actually very strong, because we saw that children are the hidden victims, survivors of domestic violence. And so we have mental health interventions for them, like therapy, counseling, at the same time group activities like we do with women, so that again they don't feel this is only happening in my family. It's something that everybody is facing, and that they're not alone, and then they'll realize what the issues are. We also have something which I think is unique, is we have what we call intergenerational workshops, because the problem with survivors and their children are that what either the survivor gets really possessive about their child, or they get very angry that they have to look after the child, so they cannot carry on with their lives. The children, on the other hand, are thinking, how can I only have one parent? Why can't my mother get on with my father? Or I mean, or they will say things like, they're seeing the father is living a better life, we are not, so they're angry towards their moms. So there is a lot of it's not an easy relationship that they have. So how do you facilitate that relationship to become a healthy and meaningful one? So we have these mental health trainings which are called intergenerational workshops, where both the mother and the child are brought together, and we have a mental health specialist who comes in and helps them work out the issues, and then there is a follow-up on it, and they can work their way through. So there are very specific kind of interventions that have been designed to really address the issues that come up as we do the work, right? There's also with the families of survivors, because again, I mean, we know if it is a domestic violence case, or even if it's a sexual abuse case, it's very, the families are very like, we don't want them back, or the stigma, that all of these issues that work, and they have to face, and they also have it all ingrained in their heads. So how do you work with that? So bringing them together, showing, again, the same thing. It's not just you, there's other people. It's not your fault. There is the stigma should be with the people who are doing this, who are committing violence rather than those who are facing it, and so on. So, and also to build solidarity amongst them, just as we are building solidarity amongst women and amongst the children who are getting friends and are able to talk to each other without fear of what will my friends say. Same thing with the families. So there is a kind of we didn't start with the children and families. That was also something that happened over time. And most of our interventions, I mean, I think all of our interventions, whether they are individual or they are um, which were added on subsequent to when we started, came from the needs of survivors.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to open up the discussion with the question that Namita Bhandari emailed me this morning.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems when talking or writing about gender-based violence is the lack of data. NCRB figures have not been released after 2018. During the lockdown, we have reports of a surge in complaints received by the NCW, even though the WCD minister later said reports of a surge are scaremongering. Do we know what is the situation with regard to GBV now that the lockdown has eased, but financial constraints and the stress it is causing on families persist?
Um, it's absolutely true that during the lockdown, domestic violence increased by leaps and bounds. I mean, we saw when NCW is saying it saw a doubling of its cases of domestic violence, we saw the same. And during the lockdown, it was even it was, I would say, the tip of the iceberg, because most women during that time found it difficult to come out and speak, right, because of the lockdown. So access to telephones, access to transport to be able to come out, access to even getting out and speaking to neighbors and friends and family, and all of that had got restricted. And 24/7 survivor and the abuser in the same space, the violence that we saw during COVID times, the intensity of violence, because violence has always existed. Huh? This was not a result of COVID. What COVID did was to really intensify the violence. So if I was at one point was given a slap, I would now, somebody would take a slipper and hit me. If I was being hit by a slipper, then somebody would take a rod and hit me. It was that kind of, exaggeration of the intensity of violence and the frequency of violence. And so maybe I was only being, not only, that's the wrong word, I was facing mental abuse. Now I'm also facing physical abuse because there is 24-hour proximity. And the frustration of losing jobs, economics, stress, all of it comes to women, right? Because men know I can get away with it if I do this to this woman. But you can't take out that anger of losing a job on your employer. You will take it out on the woman at home. And that's what we saw. And we also saw a very large number of young women complaining to us who were unmarried and staying in their parental homes. And one of the main reasons was that, normally they would be out in college and they would be doing their own things. But when they were at home, they were being policed 24/7. So there was no privacy. Who are you calling? Who's calling you? Why are you on the phone? Walking into their room without, as a knock. It was like, and physical abuse against them also increased. So we got a lot of, I mean, in comparison to the non-COVID times, when we were analyzing our data, we saw a lot more young unmarried women who were college going students from upper class, middle class families coming to us and complaining about how their parents were treating them, or the brother was treating them, or father, or even mother and father as a couple were treating them. So that was one very interesting dynamic that we saw during the COVID time. And of course, as I said, the intensity of violence. And then when we reopened on the 1st of June, we started our services physically again, the numbers increased even further. And so what we are seeing now is a much higher caseload than we've ever seen before. I don't have the statistics right with me, but I would say that we have at least 2 to 3 times more cases now than we had, in the pre-COVID times. I've actually done a little study, and I'm writing a paper. So I'll be happy to share it once it's published
Please do.
with Namita. Yeah. It has been definitely a very difficult time. And because of lack of access and lack of, even now, a lot of women can't come to us because local trains are not working. So if those who are dependent on local trains, they cannot come physically. But what the good thing is that during this time, we discovered that you can also, um, you can also provide a lot of services over the phone. So during this lockdown period and post the lockdown being eased, we've been providing every service like counseling, therapy, legal advice, all of it over the phone. And so we're able to use the, conference calls facility and get the lawyer, the caseworker, and the woman together, and then they're able to speak about what's going on. And similarly with the counselor is also put in touch with the women. So we've been able to provide that not only in Bengal, Calcutta and outskirts, but across the country. That
Let
has
me
been
add a
possible.
question on to Namita's, slightly different from hers though. Um, the, the escalation of demand for services is also in some sense, I mean, domestic violence has always been, as you said, it's not a new thing, but the attention that it has got in the first few months of the lockdown, particularly, may have also drawn attention to the existence of helplines and services, which partly facilitate the escalation of demand. We routinely distribute a helpline listing here. And one of our ongoing concerns is, if you say 1 in 3 women need these services, and we're distributing the numbers, how do you grow the capacity of the service provider to absorb that need, to absorb those demands? Because however large you grow, unless 1 in 3 of us is supporting each other, we're not going to match uh, what is required. So I'll just leave that as an add-on and let you get on.
Yeah,
But we're
yeah.
accumulating questions in the chat as well.
Okay. No, so I think that this business of helpline numbers being available, this is something actually that we actively did during the lockdown, is that we went out of our way really to publicize helplines. We started with 3 mobile helplines, moved to 6, then finally we had 9 helplines and 1 mental health helpline that was dedicated to mental health services. So ultimately, starting from 3, we were up to 10, because as you said, the need was so great. So we had to, and because the lockdown happened without any warning, we didn't have that facility of so many helplines. We had the 3 which we took home, 3 mobiles, but that was like not enough. And so then it became 6, then it became 10. And the publicity that we did around these helplines are available. And this is publicity not done just by Swayam. We did campaigns online, we did social media campaigns. We collaborated with Akshara on a film where we used a lot of our film fraternity and stuff to sort of talk about, calling. And we got the helpline of the Women's Commission. We told them that you should put your, because the state has to respond. See, we as support services, idea is that ultimately we don't have to do it, the state will do it. And what the state is trying to do is to tell us to do it. So, we need to, we will never as civil society be able to address this need. It has to be done through the state services, right? So how do we ensure that the state provides for these services? So the one-stop centers that are supposed to come up, have they come up everywhere? And even if they have come up, see, during the lockdown, what we saw was none of these services functioned. Despite the fact that they're supposed to exist, and the ministry actually put out a notification saying our one-stop centers are working, women didn't get through to them. The helplines, when they called, the government helplines, people said, we're sorry, we can't help you because we can't be in touch with other people. When you called up the protection officers, they said, we can't do anything because we can't get out of our homes. What can we do? So you did not provide that backup service that was required for women. And that is what, organizations from across the country, they collated the numbers of women as organizations across the country, and then we all circulated those numbers. So women got information, at least those of them who were part of social media, and it actually reflected in the kinds of cases that came to us. During the lockdown, we saw many more middle class and upper class women getting in touch with us because the information was going through social media, or we also did some through television when we got a lot of women call in. But again, you need a phone. If you don't have a phone, then how do you call? So that was also, for poorer women, it was more difficult to get through. So I think the helplines and advertising them is very important so that women get to know. And so women's groups actually got together and we presented to the Niti Aayog, to National Commission for Women. We wrote to the Ministry of Women and Child, to our state ministries, that you have to provide the services, they're not functioning. So to put that pressure on, and also to, I think that women's groups went on an overdrive talking to the press. If you look at the amount of um, um, articles that came out around domestic violence, I've never seen it in this 25 years. Across the country, people were talking about it, and that became something that was highlighted. So I think that was an important role that was played by, and that put pressure for the services to start functioning again. And courts being closed was a huge problem, and that continued. They've just started. They've just begun. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to group a couple of the questions together. Shakti says, thanks very much for your talk. Could you speak a bit about whether the emergence of digital space has changed any aspects of Swayam's work? And if so, in what ways? And I'm going to add Janaki V's question to that. Telecounseling covered areas during lockdown. And then we can go on to the others.
Right. So as I was mentioning that definitely, the lockdown changed the way we functioned. I mean, we had to respond to the need. The only way we could do it was through the telephone. So the telephone and the digital space, right? So Zoom was something we all had to learn very quickly. And secondly is, how do we do even simple things like conference calls? Honestly, we didn't know how they functioned, using WhatsApp for groups around with women. And then not all women have WhatsApp. So then even using the telephone, which we had to be able to connect women from different places together if they had telephones. So we realized that counseling on the phone is not the same as counseling face to face, right? We've done telephone counseling over time, but not done only telephone counseling. If we start with telephone counseling, the woman then comes to us and we do face-to-face counseling, right? The second follow-ups and stuff are done face-to-face. But here you are not having any face-to-face because these women were calling you for the first time, and every intervention subsequent was only on the phone. How do you deal with that? So right away, we had to do a training for all the caseworkers who were intervening. How do you respond to people on the telephone? How do you continue the conversation? Because a woman who's sitting across you will see your concern and your empathy when you're sitting with them, but when you're on a phone, they're only hearing a voice. How do you make that connection with them? So we really had to do a training with our caseworkers, and that we did through Zoom. So then the Zoom technology was used to be able to do that, and then they were able to move ahead. We also use the Zoom technology for bringing people, survivors together, and we did workshops on Zoom for those of them who have smartphones. See, and technology is limited. Huh? It's only limited to people who have the technology. But at least with those who did have it, we were able to do, workshops and one of the things that we also did was that because it was not just domestic violence, but also COVID, resulting in women being very scared about what's happening. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how to protect themselves. At the same time, some of the cases that came to us were like survivors are going out and flaunting all the COVID guidelines, coming back home and then wanting to have sex with the women. And they were petrified. Like, you're going out, you're not keeping anything. And if something happens to you, what's going to happen to me? So there were lots and lots of these kinds of issues that were coming up, and the fear and lack of understanding around COVID. So we did things like we recorded voice messages where a doctor spoke about COVID, and then we distributed these voice messages through the phone to all the women. Then I also did like a video where we talked about the fact that, Swayam is there for you. These are you've got the phone numbers. You can call at whichever time. We actually initially kept our phones open till 11 o'clock at night. We had like long days where the phones were open for women. So then we circulated that video. So through videos, we talked about the virus, we talked about the support that Swayam can give, that we are around there for you. And then we circulated the phone numbers. Then, we managed to get to the office and pick up information about the women, the phone numbers of the existing women that we were working with, so we could call them and, tell them we're there. And then later, as the lockdown started, towards May, we started giving out rations, because one of the things that happened was that women were talking about the fact they didn't have anything to eat because they'd lost jobs, especially the poorer women. And that so we did a lot of, which we've never done. We've a rights-based organization, never been a kind of relief-based organization, but we also had to do that. So I think that technology really helped us in working with survivors, and also on the other hand, all the advocacy work we did with Niti Aayog, or with other, all the organizations coming together for presentations to the NCW, all was done through technology, through the Zoom platform. So I think that it was really important. And one of the things that we also realized with the use of technology was how it worked for mental health. A lot of women don't want to be sitting in front of you when they're talking about their mental health. And the phone gives this distance. So we found that that many, many more women were accessing mental health services as compared to before. So that was one big thing. And I think the second thing was we were able to provide mental health services to our district offices, which we've never been able to do, the community centers, because you don't have people who are there to be able to give it. So through the phone, we were actually able to provide a service that we had not done before to places where we had not reached before. So the technology also showed us that there are ways for us to, even if we were intervening, say, with the police, it was through the phone. It was everything was done through the phone. And we actually were very active in intervention with the police, because a lot of women had fled home. I think our statistics showed that during the 2 months of the lockdown, about 30% of the survivors who we worked with had to flee home because of the level and intensity of violence. So you had to be in touch with the police to pick them up, take them to a safe space where shelters weren't functioning. So either their parental home or somewhere, a friend's house or something, because we don't have a shelter home. So, that kind of, so technology actually saved us. Without technology, there would have been chaos. So I think that has been a learning, that we can continue to provide services up to a point with technology. And then we also saw that, in group meetings that we were bringing women together. Earlier, a lot of women, because they were working, they couldn't come on, for those meetings. But now through Zoom, you can time it in a way that they can also be part of that program. So a lot of that has happened thanks to technology. So, when you're saying telecounseling covered which areas, it was across the country. We did counseling. We followed up cases throughout the country, as well as all our districts. A lot of the districts that I think we did 9 or 10 states and about 11 or 12 districts of Bengal during this time.
There's a question from Sudaroli that I'm going to read out because it sort of picks up the same conversation. If a woman approaches the support services while they stay back at home, it may escalate the violence by the perpetrator. What is your observation and how would you address this?
So when a woman comes to us, we don't tell the perpetrator she's come to us. I mean, she decides when she wants to tell him or not tell him. The idea is that a woman will come and first may not want to take any action and move out, and she's still there, so she's vulnerable. So what do you do? As an organization, what we do is tell her what her rights are, what her options are, what she can do, so that she realizes that, it's not like there's no way out. There is a way out, and that she can work towards that. All right. As she starts developing her self-confidence, her sense of self, because all of those are pretty poor when they come in. Once she starts doing that, she'll decide when she wants to tell the person, because we have a very strict confidentiality policy. That man or whoever the perpetrator will know.
Reaching out to you on the phone, for example, from home during the lockdown is, I think, the context of the question.
No, I think what the Sudaroli has said, that if she approaches the support services whilst they stay back at home.
Which is the woman, yeah.
Yeah. Are you talking only about COVID?
So did you want to turn on your mic and clarify? Actually, it's a very small group. You can all turn on your mics and videos.
Yeah, I just wanted, because what I have understood from the question is that when they come and they talk to you, then, the perpetrator is, if they're still with the perpetrator, then what happens? So I'm talking in general. If you're
Ah,
talking about COVID per se, uh, again, women got in touch with us at a point in time when the perpetrator could not hear them. A lot of them just WhatsApped us, by the way.
mm,
When we're talking about the phone, it's not just calling, it was also through WhatsApp, because they couldn't speak, so they were WhatsApping and deleting, WhatsApping and deleting. So they also had to find a space where the perpetrator was not there. Sometimes late at night they WhatsApped us, then we WhatsApped them back, and then they got back to us again late at night. So there were ways in which they ensured that the perpetrator wouldn't know. But when they needed intervention, at that point in time, we intervened with the police. The police on occasion went to their homes, brought them out of the homes, or if they had run away, they picked them up from certain spots, which we told them, the woman is sitting here. So then they took them to a shelter home or to a safe space, which she wanted to go to. So that was how it worked. We would never call a woman back unless she asked us to call back, or told us, you can call us at this time, or you call me at that time. Because a lot of them didn't have money on their phone, so we would call them back. They could receive the call, but they couldn't make the call. So, but it was always done in conversation with them, so that they would be safe during that time.
uh, Janaki is actually Dr. Janaki, who's a research coordinator at Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. And she asks, is there any suggestion for yoga therapy? It's proven to be a great stress buster.
Yeah, we did yoga for a while. Women used to come. We had a yoga instructor who would come in. But somehow, because of the timing, it didn't really work out. Now with Zoom, all of these things are possible. So maybe we can reintroduce it. But yoga therapy was something that we did use. We also use dance movement therapy with survivors for a while. And now the dance group actually is that. It's, using dance as therapy, as well as, I mean, if you take theater, if you look at Proyash, all of these are therapies as well as, awareness generation tools. Actually, they work in three ways. They work in building self-confidence and self-esteem at one level. So personal development. They work as a therapy in changing, their own mindsets, understandings, and also therapy in terms of, uh, you know, realizing their own potential, getting out of that the trauma that they're in, and they also work for awareness. So I think that they serve three purposes, um, all of these. And definitely yoga is something that we did try, but we've not been able to do it on a consistent basis because of lack of possibility of the timings that was suitable for. But that's something we can always go back to. In fact, we were talking about Zoom being able to overcome that,
Yeah.
in a sense.
That's the advantage when things grow organically, that if they don't work, you can actually put them on pause and pick them up again later, as opposed to when you suddenly pick up a project because a donor tells you or there's some external impetus to do it. It's harder to pick up, harder to drop, harder to course correct in those circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I always call the donor stuff the flavor of the month, which we
Yeah,
avoided like the plague. We were very focused
absolutely.
about what we wanted to do, and we just, did that.
Mhm, mhm. Shakti has another question. Could you also discuss some of the challenges you might have faced in running Swayam over the last 25 years and any lessons and advice you could give to younger organizations, such as us?
That's, yes. I think, the challenges that we've faced have been mostly around attitudes, and the attitude starting from the survivor to the families, to the communities, to the state agencies. It is this whole business about how violence is perceived. And so, at every level, when you're trying to work on this issue, you are facing blocks from, like, if you start with the survivor herself, who's been brought up to believe that no matter what, if it is a domestic violence situation, I have to put up with it, and if it is a sexual abuse situation, then I have to keep quiet about it. So it's like that in itself is the biggest, sort of restrictor or preventer, the challenge to change that, to say, to get her to a point where she's able to take a decision to better her life. So I think that has been a big challenge for us as an organization. Then it is, how do you get support for that woman? The immediate support from the family, because I think the family is on the one hand responsible for violence, but on the other hand, we've also seen it is the biggest support, because there is no state support that you can count on, right? And any organization will never have the capacity to provide unlimited support for life for women who come to them. It's not possible. And it's not what we want. We don't want dependence. We want them to move on. So how does that work? Then how do you get the families involved in taking responsibility? Because in our country, most of the, we work around a family situation. We don't work in isolation. So how do you bring them along? And again, how do you create societies that are responsive? Because, just yesterday, I got a case where this woman has been, acid was thrown on her back by her brother-in-law, who was beating up his wife. So she went to prevent that brother-in-law from hitting the wife. And he got really angry. And the next day he went and threw acid on her. And so she got acid on her back, on her arms. So she filed a complaint against him in court. She filed a case with the police, and then it went to court. The man has been put into jail. Now the family has turned against her. The woman whose husband it is saying, I want my husband back. Her husband is saying, take back the case. The community around her is saying that take back the case, So it's like, how do you show that this is unacceptable? How can you side with somebody like this? This is what I'm trying to say, is that it is such a, it's a mindset that they can condone somebody who has done this to a woman, but the woman is the one who's in trouble. Then they have locked her up now, and we're now trying to address that issue. In the her husband's house, she was called back from her mother's house. She's been locked up there, and now neither her brother or her father are going to the police to say anything, because they're saying, like, we can't deal with it. The person who's come to us is a mother who works outside the city in another state. So this is the challenge you're facing, that if they are in another district, if the family is not going to talk about it, how do you support that woman? So that, I think, is a huge challenge, that the support that is required. And then when you go to state agencies, if you take a police station, go to the police, it's always like the woman's fault. If it is a case of sexual abuse, why were you there? What were you doing? All the questions that should not be asked will be asked. There's one of the cases which we dealt with where this woman was out in a pub, and then she went home. It was late at night, and she was raped. And then the police officer, when she went to the Thana, asked her that, would you like to come out and have a beer with me? I mean, it's like, if you are out at night, it means you deserve to be raped. That is the understanding that the, state agencies have. Then that is a big challenge. How do you get the cases reported? How do you get a woman to get respect when she goes to, file a case? How do you ensure that the investigation is done properly? Because most of these people are involved in law and order and investigation. They don't have the skills to investigate. There was a case where, for example, it was a dowry murder, and the woman had been burnt to death. They didn't go to the house for 6 days. By the time they went, everything was cleaned up. What are they going to get as forensic evidence? So, these are the issues. If you go to a hospital and this woman has injuries, and you ask them, please write that the injuries were made by her husband, or they won't write it. They don't want to go to court. So they will not write it. Or we had one case where there was a woman who was hung, 17-year-old, pregnant 6 months. And when the doctor did the postmortem report, he signed in a way nobody could understand who the doctor was. So the case was delayed for 6 months because we had to find out who the doctor was. So, it's like at every step, your challenge is how do you get justice for women? Because everything is so stacked up against them. You go to court, the judge who's sitting there, I was talking about the judge who said it's okay to, slap a woman if she gets out of line. Those are the judges who are sitting there. So then how do you get justice for them? The courts, the long time that they take for any orders to be passed, then the order is passed, then the order is not implemented. So women are running from pillar to post, not just for the order, but to make sure that the order is implemented. Now, if I'm getting an order for maintenance, I have to eat every month. I have to eat every day. I cannot not have money to feed my child and myself. And if I'm not getting that money, how do you expect me to survive? But the state doesn't look at it like that. You know, they are very open to letting men get away with this. So how do we ensure that the state is responsive? I think these are the biggest challenges that we faced. I mean, other than that, I would say everything else falls into place. But these are the big challenges of how do you ensure that women actually get um, justice, and how do you ensure that they then are able to go back on track? I mean, and be independent and support themselves, because all the factors around them are totally stacked against them. And as an organization, we have a limited capacity to support. Beyond that, you will need everybody else's intervention, which is the difficult part of it. Um, so yeah, I think that that is the biggest challenge that we faced.
The other part of her question was lessons and advice.
Lessons and advice. What I would say was, despite all of the challenges, um, it's amazing to see how women can actually, with a little bit of support, move ahead. So don't lose hope. All of this sounds very kind of negative, but at the end of the day, I mean, I've seen over the last 25 years women who came in situations where I didn't know if I would have been able to survive them, but they are now living full lives, right? So you know that things are possible, change is possible, and you have to persist. I mean, I think that is one of the things which is really important. And the second thing I would say is to, as I said, one of the challenges is that women are not often able to overcome, and they take a lot of time. So say as a caseworker, you're working with a woman and you've moved, like we have cases where you've moved very far ahead and they're all ready to take a step, they've taken a step, and then they go back into the same situation. And then you feel very let down. You can't afford to do that, because what we have to understand is women have their own pace and their own realities that they have to deal with, and they're the best judge about what they will be able to cope with or not, or how they will be able to lead their lives. And our understanding of their situation is very different from their own. And so we have to be patient, and we have to keep our doors open for any woman as many times as she goes in and out of that door, taking your service, going back, however much you feel that she has let you down. It's not you, it's about her. So I think keeping women at the focus is, I think, a very important rule that we need to have as far as this is concerned. And I would say the third thing would be to respond to the needs of women. I mean, as Swarna was saying, we've never taken up a project, ever. We work with a goal, and whatever is required to be done to reach that goal comes from what women want, from the survivors. So I think that it's important to constantly check back as to what the needs are at that point in time and respond to those. So I think that, and again, not just looking at violence against women as a whole, in a holistic manner, not just doing piecemeal stuff, because as I said, each one feeds into the other, and it's important for you to have both. I mean, you may not do everything yourself, but at least collaborate with people who are doing the other parts so that you're able to make the whole together. Yeah.
There are three other questions, actually four. So I'm going to read them out. The first one is from Sudhir. Do you have any therapy sessions for children who are survivors of DV? Shall I just read them all out, Anu, at this point?
Yeah.
Several of them. Janaki asks, how has collaboration and networking at various levels evolved in terms of intervention? And Parabita Basu asks, I was wondering if there was any thought to train someone from the community to be the first-hand contact and with direction solutions for the person in trouble, especially for the remote areas and marginalized communities. You've kind of answered all three before, but I'll leave it to you to go with it, and then leave the last question for the end.
Okay. So yeah, definitely. I mean, the therapy sessions for children, as I was saying, we also work with children, and they are the hidden survivors of domestic violence. That is true. So we've, again, we've introduced one-to-one therapy for survivors. We have a play therapy for little children till the age of 8. We have play therapy with them. So it's also age appropriate therapy for each of the children, for the children. And then we have group therapy as well. We have group sessions. Uh, and when we look at mental health, we look at positive mental health. So it's not just therapy, but it's also um, creating an environment where children understand what's happening to them is not a problem of their family only. It's a larger problem, and that they have support outside. Other people are experiencing it, and also to have friendships amongst each other so that they can talk to each other. So that is definitely something that we do with children. In terms of collaboration and networking, very important, because see, as I was mentioning, if we are to support survivors, then the networking works both at the personal level of intervention with survivors as well as at the advocacy level. Because if you want women's rights to be if you want women to be able to access their rights, then the state policies and laws have to work for them. So at both levels, if you are intervening, you have to have collaboration. So for example, as an organization, we do not have vocational trainings, excepting for one. I think we do tailoring. But other than that, there are many other vocations that women may want to take up. So if you have to support them with vocational training, then you have to tie up with all the organizations, collaborate with them who are doing this work. Similarly with shelter homes, we don't have a shelter. So now we collaborate with both non-governmental as well as governmental shelters. If you're looking at legal support also, now not everywhere do we have the possibility of being able to give legal advice. So where we don't, then you have to collaborate. We have to go to the local league, and also we should make sure that they work, the Legal Aid Services Authority. So you're working with them. So networking as a policy is essential to any work that you do with survivors as indirect support. And then when you want to advocate for laws, for policies, then again, you need a consolidated voice together. So I think that that's how the work around violence needs to be done, is in collaboration, because individually we can only reach a very small limit of what we can do, but together we can actually make a big difference. And the third question was? Yes.
The third question was
Training the
reaching out
people
to
from the
them.
community.
Yeah.
So here, as I mentioned earlier, we do this in two ways. One is that we are training survivors themselves. We have survivor groups where we train survivors on how they can intervene in their communities. So we give them training around laws, training about how do you write a GD, FIR, how do you counsel a woman. So we go through a counseling training with them. We go through a casework trainings, just like we do with NGOs. We have that for grassroots level workers. And so we do that with our groups as well. So they go back into their communities and they're able to do the first level of intervention. At the same time, we also do these trainings with grassroots level organizations. So then their workers also have, so you're spreading out this, because we don't believe that we need to expand the organization and go to lots of places. We believe that we need to train people who are there to be able to work. So that is the way in which we do it. But we also have two community centers in Metia Bruce and Diamond Harbor. And there we have groups of women. So in Diamond Harbor, we have, I think, about more than 200 groups that we are working with. And so we are trying to train from them, take leadership, women who are showing leadership, skills, and then bringing them together and training them to do the same work. So yes, definitely, it's something that we have a solution within the community, so that we know that when we move out of the community, there will be community support for the woman, even if we are not there.
So the last question is, does Swayam have a model worth replicating, especially after 25 years in addressing gender violence at home? Case of women with disabilities.
Where is that question?
It's Janaki's second question.
Okay.
11:36 a.m. Can you see it?
Yeah. Okay, model worth replicating. I would say so. How can I not say? I think definitely it is. And I think that all of the stuff that I talked about in terms of having a holistic model, in fact, when you're talking about women with disabilities, we've actually done a gender training module with women with disabilities and violence and domestic violence with IICP, the Institute of Cerebral Palsy in Kolkata, because we've always felt that disability is something that has to be integrated. And unfortunately, when we are organizations, I mean, this is a reflection for all of us, which is why we also reached out to organizations who are working on with disability. And when we were doing even our judicial trainings, we would get a disability rights activist to come and talk to the judges about their marginalization. So then we did this training manual with them. And we also help women with disabilities who are facing domestic violence. We collaborate with organizations who are working with disability to help, because we don't understand enough about disability. So if we have a woman with disability who comes in, then we, what their rights are and so on, then we collaborate with disability rights groups in the city. So yeah, I do think that our model is definitely, and in fact, we are in the process of writing up a handbook on two things. One is how do you do casework, and the second is on how do you do counseling for survivors. And I think the two trainings that we do are kind of encapsulating that module or model of how we work.
But as an organization, Anu, I mean, uh, that's a model worth replicating in terms of the actual services you provide. But in terms, I think, of your organizational history, uh, it it's hard to, it's been so organic. It's hard to say, well, I'm going to start an organization and I'm going to grow it like Swayam, because Swayam's journey is probably quite unique, as is every
I
organization.
think every organization's journey is unique. And I believe very strongly that if you get guided by the work on the ground and you do it faithfully and you do it honestly and you do it with purpose and with commitment, it'll show you the path. And I know that when I started the organization, I really didn't know where I was going. If I was sitting here today, 25 years down the line, and looking at myself at when I was 32 and I started this organization, I would say there's no way I can do it, because I did not have the theoretical, the practical, any knowledge on how to start. I just had a passion and a commitment, and that was it. And the work taught me. And you have to be willing to learn. I think one of the biggest things is you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to take risks, and you have to be willing to course correct and be guided by the work itself. If you do that, I think then your journey, any organization's journey, will take its own course, because the work will guide it. What you are seeing on the ground and responding to, that is a constant feedback mechanism for you as an organization. So I think I would say that most organizations that work over time have done that, because you cannot be the same organization that you started. You have to change, you have to evolve, you have to respond. But uh, lots of organizations branch out into different areas if they want to. We as an organization focused on women's rights, violence. We were focused on certain issues. We didn't want to become too large. We didn't want to become too big, because then we wanted to do in-depth work, smaller, in-depth work. I mean, in 25 years, 40 people is not that much of a difference from 2 to 40. But that was a very conscious decision that was taken, that we want to do in-depth work. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin.
I think at Prajna, we have quite an appreciation of how much larger 40 is from 2, because no, because it takes a lot to grow a team. You know, it's not just a matter of gathering people into a space. It's also having the ability to sustain them, to keep them, to pay for them month after month. So I think we have a very real appreciation of how effective a measure of growth that can be.
One thing, Swarna, for me, or for Swayam as an organization, I've always had this belief: you do work, the money will come. And it's weird. It's almost as if there is somebody guiding you, saying, just keep doing what you're doing and it'll happen. And till today, that has been the truth for me. I mean, money has come from unexpected places. I used to go out right at the beginning. I had no money, I had no background, no nothing. Which funder is going to look at you without any I would go out to all the Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, this, that, talk, talk, talk. And then one fine day I get a phone call saying some woman has won a car. She has auctioned it and she wants to give money to 10 NGOs. And I heard you, please apply. And I got money from there out of the blue. So things happen. I think the world conspires. If you're committed and you have yourself saying, you were saying earlier that, every year you think, how will we carry on? But you do because you're committed. It'll happen. I feel that if you're there, most of the organizations who are there today are there because of their commitment, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good positive note to close this session on, although I think we could keep chatting for quite a long time. Uh, Thank you so much for making the time to come and
Thanks, Swayam,
share
for
with
the
us.
opportunity.
No, this is really wonderful. We look forward to having a video that we can go back to, and we will certainly share that with you. Come back again.
Okay, perfect. I'd love to. So thank you so much,
Thank
Swarna. Thank you
you.
all for being here. Okay.